What's up everyone, Lion Roar here, and in episode 14 of the Beginner's Guide to Gods Unchained, we are going to cover some advanced gameplay strategies. But first, join me over in Gemstone Legends. It's a fantastic match 3 RPG game, and it's players that get in early on games like this that are at the biggest advantage. Not only will you help the channel out by using the link in the description of this video, but you're going to get a free epic hero named Moralia along with a bunch of gold, gems, and potions. After you download the game, you'll have access to events which will get you even more amazing heroes and loot. Guys, wow, you don't want to miss this opportunity because you do not get it in the regular App Store. Download it now, and I will see you in Gemstone Legends. Alright, so I'm going to cover a lot of the main strategy decisions you need to be considering while playing Gods Unchained, but of course this is not an exhaustive list because there's like millions of decisions to be made in this game, and that's what makes it so fun. I'm also not going to profess to be the best player in the world or anything like that. Of course, even if you know the gameplay strategies, they have to be practiced, and you have decisions to be making between different strategies as you go. So you may be better than me, but I'm going to cover a lot of the primary ones here because it is going to take you to the next level as you're playing. The first and probably one of the most important concepts in a trading card game like Gods Unchained is that of card advantage, or basically drawing and playing more cards than your opponent. Clearly, the player who plays the most cards is probably going to win the game. So what are some examples of this? Well, one of my all-time favorite cards is Celestial Stag, which has the text Blessed, or basically when it comes out on the battlefield, you get to choose between 3 Blessed effects. It's kind of like its own card, so you kind of gain card advantage the moment you play it. And then it says, after you play your first creature each turn, add a random nature card to your hand. So now every time you're playing a creature, you're gaining another card. This adds up fast so that you're playing a lot more cards than your opponent, putting a lot more possible damage out on the board, or coming up with more responses to what your opponent is doing, and that is why a player who draws more cards tends to win. Another example of this that might not be so obvious is something like Bladefly, which says roar, summon 2 Bladeflies. So when this comes down on the battlefield, it's summoning 2 more creatures just like it, and that in turn is gaining you more cards. It may not seem so much like card advantage because you're not drawing more cards, but now for the cost of 1 card, you've played 3 cards, and now your opponent has to deal with those 3 cards. Now here's an example of something that looks like card advantage but is not card advantage, and that's Brimstone. So this one for 1 mana says deal 2 damage to each god and then draw a card. The reason this is not card advantage is because you're not actually gaining a card, you're just sort of siphoning through your deck or cantripping. That is a strategy, but it is not card advantage. Let's talk about cantrips. The reason cantrips are not card advantage is because the card simply replaces itself. It's not actually drawing you new cards. It's not actually putting you ahead of your opponent. But these are cards that can work well in things like control decks that are looking for a specific answer to what the opponent's doing, or a combo deck that's looking for specific cards to put together to create the combo. So an example of a cantrip would be Seeing Stone, that for 1 mana says foresee 1, which lets you look at the top card of your deck and decide whether you want to draw that next or not. If you decide not to, you can put it on the bottom of your deck, or if you do want to draw it, you just leave it alone. And then Seeing Stone says draw a card. So basically you're spending a card to draw a card. So you're not really gaining card advantage, but you are creating card quality. You're deciding what you want next, and possibly being able to draw that card. Then there's the concept of trading 1 for 1, or sometimes it's referred to as removal 1 for 1. And that's when you spend 1 of your cards to get rid of 1 of your opponent's cards. I want to put it in the simplest terms like that because if you think about a trading card game like Gods Unchained like a resource game, then you can strip away a lot of the art especially, but a lot of the text and the name of the card and the flavor and all that fun stuff, and just ask yourself the question, am I at least trading 1 for 1? Am I using one of my cards to get rid of one of their cards? Or if you have to lose one of your cards, is it at the expense of one of your opponent's cards? If you're trading one for one, you're at parity, and sometimes you can gain an advantage trading one for one if the card that you're losing is worse than the card that your opponent is losing. Let's go through a couple of examples here. First is Canopy Barrage, and this is pretty straightforward as removal. In fact, a lot of these removal spells can be very powerful because you can just straight up remove an opposing creature, and the more straightforward it is, the more likely it is to destroy a creature, the better the removal usually is, the more likely it is to be relevant. So Canopy Barrage says, deal 4 damage to a random enemy creature. This is especially great early game and even mid game, where opposing creatures tend to have 4 health or less. Now, Canopy Barrage unfortunately doesn't let you pick the creature. It's a random enemy creature, so oftentimes you have to manage a board in a way to make sure that it's actually going to hit the creature that you want it to, or maybe you don't care and you're okay with it just getting rid of any creature. But more powerful spells are going to be the ones that allow you to target creatures. They're probably going to cost more mana because this only costs 2, or they're going to deal more damage. Another example of like recurring damage would be this Catapult that has backline and deal 3 damage. And the reason that this is more powerful and costs more mana is because you get to actually choose where the 3 damage goes. And if it is still alive for multiple turns, you can deal 3 damage over and over again. And here's one that's not so obvious, and that's the Vanguard Axe Woman, but I want to present a situation to you that occurs a lot in Gods Unchained, and that is that on the first turn, someone will play Vanguard Axe Woman, and then on the opponent's first turn, they'll also play a Vanguard Axe Woman, and you'll often see them trade 1 for 1. So the one player will just decide to get rid of the other player's Vanguard Axe Woman by hitting it, and now you're all at parity. Turn 2 is like turn 1 again. However, where you can gain an advantage with something like Vanguard Axe Woman is, let's say that they play their 3/2 creature that has Spell Boost 1. Well, not only is that a pretty good ability, but the strength of the opposing creature is higher than the Vanguard Axe Woman. So that card that they just put down is better than the Vanguard Axe Woman. So since you can put this down and it has Blitz, you can play the Vanguard Axe Woman and take out their 3/2 creature, gaining an advantage because you traded 1 for 1, yes, but you took out a better quality card with your technically worse quality card. Next is the concept of the 2 for 1, or really it can be 2 or more for 1, because sometimes it's 2 for 1, 3 for 1, 4 for 1, 5 for 1, sometimes even 6 for 1, depending on what the heck the card is. But basically this is removal that gets rid of multiple cards for the cost of 1 of yours. So an example of this might be like the 6 mana Ether Vanguard, which when it comes down has an ability that says Roar, deal 2 damage to 2 enemy creatures. You may select the same creature twice. So let's say that the opponent has 2 Vanguard Axe Women down. Well, if you play the Ether Vanguard and it comes down, it can deal 2 damage to each of those creatures. So basically you 2 for 1'd your opponent. You got rid of 2 of their cards for 1 of yours. Now this is what you're going to be looking at doing all game long. The more you can 2 for 1 or more your opponent, the more likely it is for you to win. It's sort of the opposite of card advantage, because card advantage is gaining cards, while 1 for 1 and 2 for 1ing the opponent is getting rid of cards. But basically, by getting rid of cards, again, the player with the most cards who's able to keep them on the table and win, wins. Another example of this is Apocalypse Now, that says destroy all creatures and then destroy all creatures again. This is a really difficult, very expensive card to get, so you're probably not going to see this too much until you get up into the mythic ranks. But as you can tell, this one's often going to do a lot more than 2 for 1. Often it's going to potentially 6 for 1 or even more if they have creatures that recur, because it destroys all creatures, and then if any creatures come out of the void because of some ability like Afterlife, it's going to destroy them again. Another one that's not so obvious is Wild Hog, and there's a reason that people like to play this on the first turn. Let's keep going with our Vanguard Axe Woman example. Let's say the opponent plays Vanguard Axe Woman and you play Wild Hog. Well, on one of the following turns, whether they decide to hit your Wild Hog or you decide to hit their Vanguard Axe Woman, Wild Hog's gonna kill the Vanguard Axe Woman and stay alive. And now what that means is that your opponent, who just lost a card and you kept yours, is going to have to potentially use another card to get rid of Wild Hog. This is a very basic example, but this is another sort of like 2-for-1 type of scenario. And it's why a lot of people like to use frontline creatures that have armor or a whole lot of strength and health, because oftentimes you're spending multiple cards trying to get rid of that card. Next up, let's talk about strategies with the Sanctum, or basically on the right-hand side of your screen when you're playing, there are 3 cards that are available to you and your opponent. You do have to gain favor by dealing damage as you go, so once you have enough favor, you can buy a card from the Sanctum. Well, there's 2 main strategies with this, the first being choose the best card for you. I mean, I think that's obvious, right? So like when you have enough favor, look to see what's in the Sanctum and, well, choose the one that works well with your strategy. If they have an annoying creature on the other side of the battlefield you really need to get rid of, try to look for removal. If they have a relic that's hard to get rid of and you need to remove the relic, look for your relic removal out of the Sanctum. I mean, I think that's all pretty obvious, but what's not obvious to people is that sometimes the best card to choose from the Sanctum is not the best card for you, but it's the card that your opponent really, really wants. And you can go in there and take it before they need it. Sometimes this is like frontline creatures. Maybe you're dealing a lot of damage and they're trying to stop that, so they want to grab a frontline creature to put it out. Well, you can grab it first, and not only do you get to put that creature on the battlefield, but now they don't have what they need to stop your attack. Another example of this is like when, let's say I'm playing the Zombie Death deck, which I have a number of videos I've made if you want to go watch those. Well, there's a really, really important relic in that called Necroscepter. And of course, my opponent is going to want to remove that. So in the Sanctum, there is relic removal that shows up. If there's relic removal in the Sanctum, me as the Zombie Death player, even though I don't necessarily need to remove their relic, I want to get that out of the Sanctum. I want to buy that so my opponent can't use that. Another strategy to take you to the next level that requires a lot of patience is holding back. And this is one that's even tough for me to do. Even when I know I should do it, it's tempting to just play out the best cards that I have in my hand and just try and race my opponent and beat them. I know it's easy in my mind to think that my opponent might not have as good of a hand as I do, and so if I play my best things out, I might get ahead and stay ahead and win. And while that might sometimes be appropriate, oftentimes the best thing to do is actually just be patient, hold back, play out your worst creatures and play out your worst removal, and only use removal if you have to. Let your opponent do their thing and kind of respond to them. It is a little more defensive, but I want you to consider this. Let's say your opponent puts out a Wild Hog, that 1 mana 2/3, and you have the Canopy Barrage. Well, for 1 mana, they just put a creature out that you are using 2 mana to get rid of, and it's dealing 4 damage while the Wild Hog has 3 health, so really you're leaving 1 damage on the table. What if you were able to remove the Wild Hog in some other way, like with your creatures or something like that, and you hold the Canopy Barrage back for a really troublesome creature on the other side of the battlefield? Like, for example, you might have one of the god powers that deals 1 damage. Let's say that they put out a creature that has 5 health. Well, now you have the Canopy Barrage, which will deal 4, and then maybe your god power to deal the 5th damage, in which case you still have only used 1 card, and you've gotten rid of something really troublesome on the other side of the battlefield. So it's important to not always just play out your best removal right away, and the same is true for creatures. You might be able to use a mana gem to like put out your best creature, like maybe it's in your opening hand, you're like, yes, on turn 2, putting out this 3 mana creature that is going to be really hard for my opponent is like winning the race, using air quotes, but what if your opponent has the really good removal still in their hand because they've been holding back? Well, then you play out your creature and they use their removal, and all of a sudden everything that's left in your hand is not as good as the things that are left in their hand. So patience is important. You do have to know when to hold back. It's not going to help you if you just hold everything back for the entire game, right? Like, you can't be afraid of playing out your best cards. You just need to kind of assess the situation and make sure that you're not playing your best stuff out up front into their worst stuff, because what's going to happen is you're going to be left with your worst stuff in hand and they're going to have their best stuff in hand. When you're playing Gods Unchained, it's important to think of everything as a resource. Now, there was a reason I was simplifying things down to trading 1 for 1 or 2 for 1 and thinking of the cards not as their names or even the text that's written on them, but as ideas that you are spending your resources efficiently. And cards are a resource, but they're not the only resource. There's also mana. Are you spending your mana every turn? If you're not, then you're being inefficient. Now, just like I said, you have to decide which strategy is going to be best for you, because maybe, like on the previous tip, it's important to be holding back. But oftentimes, if you're not spending all of your mana every turn, you're being inefficient, and that is going to cause you to lose. So you have to look for a way to use all of your mana and put the cards out in an order that is going to be most efficient. Your life total is also a resource. You can lose life. It's okay. Sometimes it's all right to let that wild hog hit you a couple of times. It's only doing 2 damage per turn. So, 2, 4, 6, maybe even 8 damage. If you hold back your removal and just let that wild hog hit you a couple times, but you save your removal for a creature that's even harder to deal with, then it's fine. You have 30 life points to spend before you lose the game. So sometimes it is okay to allow your opponent to take some life away from you when you're considering the other strategies. Time is also a resource. Maybe you've looked at the board, you know exactly what's going on, and you have an idea in your mind of exactly what to do, and so you make a move real quick. You don't have to do that. You can let some of the time run off the clock, and in fact you should. Not just do the first thing that pops in your mind, but kind of run through the different strategies we've been talking about and say, would it be better to hold back? Should I use all of my mana this turn? Should I, or is there a way to 2 for 1? I've already thought of an idea of how to 1 for 1, but can I 2 for 1 them potentially? So let the timer run and just kind of think through your options and then pick the best one. Of course, the Sanctum is a resource too, and we just talked through that one. Typically, as card advantage goes, the more cards you pull from the Sanctum, the more likely you are to win. So you want to do that. And of course, there's more resources in the game too. So as you're playing, just think about what resources are available to you and what are available to your opponent. And on that note, calculate odds and take risks, because you've got to consider what your opponent has in hand and what they've already played. You can't see what your opponent has in particular, but you can get a really good idea of what they likely have based on the types of decks you've played before. And you know what you have in your hand and what you've already played and have drawn. So you got to think about the likelihood that your opponent is going to draw or play certain cards and the likelihood that you're going to draw certain cards in the future. You can't always know exactly what's going to happen, but you can think in your head what is likeliest to happen and take risks based on that. I'm advising you to take risks, but not reckless risks. So you take your best guesses based on what you think will probably happen. And it is to your benefit to take risks sometimes, like with the Canopy Barrage that's going to deal damage, random damage to an opponent's creature. Well, you may not know exactly which creature that's going to hit, but you can manage the odds. So maybe if you have a way to get rid of some of the other littler creatures first so that it hits their biggest creature, you might be able to get rid of everything and leave the biggest creature for the Canopy Barrage, in which case it's not so random anymore. Or maybe you can at least get it down to 2 creatures and give yourself a 50-50 type of odds that the Canopy Barrage is actually going to hit the creature that you want it to. So kind of think about, as you're playing the game, what's going on? What is the board state? And in your hand, if you have like a really powerful spell or creature, but you're afraid they might have removal, you can't just hold on to it for the rest of the game. you know, try and manage things a little bit. This is part of holding back a little bit. You hold that back just a little bit, maybe put some other things out that are a little bit troublesome for your opponent, and try to bait them into using their big removals or something like that first. Because at some point you're going to need to take the risk of playing out your good creature, your good win condition, whatever it may be, and hope it sticks. And sometimes you're just going to have to hope, right? They might get the god draw. They might draw the card that answers whatever it is that you're doing, and sometimes that just happens. But if you take no risks, there's no rewards. Just take calculated risks. And lastly, just a quick note, it's really important to understand the terminology in Gods Unchained, or basically all the keyword text that you're going to see printed on different cards, like, for example, hidden, soulless, frontline, backline, blessed, but there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of these words. So first of all, when you're playing a game, you can hover over the creature to read what it actually means and what it does. This needs to play into your strategy. And also, there's a website, a wiki, that I'm going to link for you that has a description of all of these, so you might just want to run through it so you have a general sense of what all the terminology means. All right, I hope you found this helpful, but of course this isn't all of the strategies out there, it's just some of the main ones. There are strategies that are specific to certain decks and against certain decks, so perhaps the best thing you can do is consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell notification so that you know when I put up gameplay videos where I will talk through what I'm doing. And again, I don't profess to be the best player in the world or anything like that, so when other players have ideas of lines of play that might be better, they'll certainly put that in the comments. All right, guys, please consider liking the video, and I will catch you in the next one.